Hey everybody, welcome to the Day Ghost. I'm Austin, and No Time to Die is coming out October 8th, so I thought what I would do for that, because there's exactly 24 days between now and then, and I assumed what I could do was review a new Bond film every single day leading up to it, because I'm really excited for that movie, and I hope it's great. So that would lead us to start with Dr. No for today. Dr. No is the very first Bond film from 1962, directed by Terrence Young, and it is very much just kind of the prototype Bond film. So, a lot of the kind of formula that you expect from the movies hasn't exactly been cemented yet, it's very much just kind of starting. So, for example, we open this film on the gun barrel, of course, which isn't played by Sean Connery, which is a little bizarre because normally it's the actor who plays Bond that does the gun barrel opening. But in this film, it's a different actor. So we have that, and then we jump straight into the opening where we get the traditional Bond theme instead of just a song. But that song also then transitions into Three Blind Mice, which is very strange, and it's just kind of very different from the series. So Three Blind Mice kind of then transitions into the opening of the film, where the Three Blind Mice, who are actual characters in this movie, who are henchmen for Dr. No, they assassinate a special agent and his assistant, and they steal the notes that he has on Dr. No. We then kind of get the sequence where that knowledge goes from person to person until we get to James Bond, which is interesting because it's not something that the series typically does. We typically just get M tells Bond where to go, and then boom, we're on the movie. But instead here, the news gets to him at a casino where he's talking to Sylvia Trench, and we get the big famous James Bond kind of introduction scene, which is just complete perfection. It is one of the best introductions in film history. It's just, there's not much you can say about it outside of it's amazing. So Bond gets brought in, M tells him the kind of job that he's going on to figure out what happened to this agent, and we get our first scene with Bernard Lee as M, who is pretty good in this movie. There's not a lot for him to do, obviously, because he's just in one scene, and M is kind of reinvented depending on what movie he's in. Lois Maxwell, on the other hand, is Moneypenny. I think this is just very much a quintessential Bond and Moneypenny scene. And interestingly enough, Lois Maxwell is one of the only women in this movie who's not dubbed, which is just very strange. But for the most part, I don't think the dubbing of the women in this movie is like awful. It's not distracting by any means, for the most part. That's very much just kind of the times, and it carries on through most of the old Bond films. So we get Bond, he goes to Jamaica to deal with this mission that he's on, and we get introduced to several kind of Bond characters that he befriends, such as Quarrel, who isn't amazing on paper, but I think the actor's charisma very much holds him up as a character, as opposed to Felix Leiter, who I think is just very nothing in this movie personally. He's just kind of there as just the Bond ally from America. I should also mention, of course, now that we're talking about Bond himself, Sean Connery is great in this movie. Just immediately he gets this character. And a lot of this movie is also just kind of showing what he does as a person and kind of, getting into Bond's head in a way, showing this is what he drinks, this is what he does in his off time playing cards, this is kind of what he does when he's on his mission. He's very thorough, and it's a lot of that. I could understand some people kind of looking at this movie and saying it's slow, because it's very much a product of its time as opposed to other Bond films. This is very much a 60s movie, and it is a bit slower and more methodical in its pace. But we get, so Bond and Quarrel go off to investigate Dr. No, where they go to his island, and the island is supposedly haunted by a dragon, which is very bizarre, and the dragon itself doesn't look very good. I mean, it's very much just kind of like a tank with a flamethrower attached to it, and I think part of what they wanted to do was maybe a little bit more than what they had the budget for, unfortunately. But while they're on the island, Bond meets Honey Rider, who is the first Bond girl in the franchise, of course, unless you count Sylvia Trench, who does come back later on, but she's mostly a cameo in both this and From Russia with Love. But Honey Rider is very good, I think, physically. Like, everybody remembers the scene of her coming out of the water at the beach. Character-wise, kind of not so much. There's an interesting discussion early on about how Dr. No killed her father, but outside of that, we don't really do anything with her. She's just kind of there for the adventure, and is there for somebody, or for Bond, sorry, to snog, if you will. So for like the third act, for example, she's just kind of kidnapped, and Bond has to save her from probably the worst trap ever conceived, where she's going to be drowned by the rising tide. But by the time Bond saves her, which is actually pretty late into the movie, like it's after he's killed Dr. No, and the water's only gone up to her ankle, like it clearly isn't very much of a rush. Dr. No himself is introduced an hour and 30 minutes roughly into this hour and 50-minute long movie, and overall I think he's just kind of not great. Dr. No himself, I think the actor does a good job with what he's given, and I think physically he's very memorable. Like, I remember the outfit, whether it's the hazmat suit or, you know, the kind of suit he's wearing before that, or his metal hands and the gloves that he wears over them. He also mentioned Spectre for the first time, which is, of course, a big thing moving forward. But overall, I think Dr. No is just kind of lackluster as a character. And, you know, we get his plan for the movie, which is to use these kind of radio beam signal, if you will, to disrupt the path of a nuclear missile. Or maybe it's just a missile. I'm not entirely sure offhand. I can't entirely remember that. But anyways, he's kind of, you know, gonna rework the trajectory of this missile. And it's just kind of not a super amazing plot or plan. It's, the set design of his lair is, I think, very interesting, and they kind of do what they can with it on the low budget that they have. And I think the fight scene between Bond and Dr. No, while very short, is pretty good. It probably could have been a little bit better, but like it is alright. And I think Dr. No's death is, you know, it's poetic in a way where his metal hands don't allow him to be able to pull himself out of being drowned the way that he is. And I really like his death scene. But the action overall, I'd say, is very hit or miss. You know, you got some of the shooting is very cold and like brutal in a way that's not super violent, but more of like a more matter-of-fact kind of violence, where, you know, at the beginning of the movie when the secretary is shot, it's very just like boom, like she's down, then they pull her over, and there's probably more blood than you typically see in the series for a shooting like that. You also get some kind of more hand-to-hand action, which is very much, it kind of reminds me of that, you know, 60s kind of feel, you know, like if you've ever seen the original 60s Star Trek show, it kind of is similar in a way to me, like that, in that you get these kind of actors who clearly don't really know how to fight, so it's very kind of silly, but it's charming in its own way, I think, personally. There's also a pretty rough car chase scene where they chase Bond, and it's all rear projection, but the rear projection isn't done very well, and the car behind Bond is so much bigger than he is, so it makes it look like Sean Connery's just very small, and it's just not very well handled. But at the same time, it also leads to, I think, one of Connery's best one-liners, where that car topples over a cliff, and somebody asks what happened, and Connery just coldly says they were on their way to a funeral. But overall, I think Dr. No is a pretty good movie. It's not brilliant by any means. It's not bad. But it's solid. It's a nice foundation, a good start for this franchise and this series, which I think will then be later perfected. And of course, there's way worse Bond films too. Like, that's not disparaging this in terms of its own series. But it's been fun talking about Dr. No. I think moving forward, with each movie, I'll probably have more to say about some and then less to say about others, just depending on the movie. But I'm really excited to talk some Bond with people, so let me know in the comments what you think of Dr. No, and I'll see you tomorrow for From Russia with Love.